skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. God of all, to you be raised, this our hymn of grateful praise. For the wonder of each hour, of the day and of the night, hill and vale and tree and flower, sun and moon and stars of light. God of all, to you be raised, this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of human love, brother, sister, parent, child, friends on earth and friends above, for all gentle thoughts and mild, God of all, to you we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the good that love inspires, for a world where none exclude, for a faith that never tires, and for every heart renewed, God of all, to you be raised this our hymn of grateful praise.
Good morning. How lovely that was. Thank you to everyone who participated in bringing us our prelude for today. I'm Reverend Leah Atkinson-Belinsky, and I am welcoming you to Fauntleroy Church's worship service. This is our Sunday worship service, and I am joined by many others, and I will introduce them in a minute here. But I hope that you are ready to worship and feel the beauty of God on this wonderful Sunday morning. We've had such a gorgeous time in Seattle. A little refreshing rain yesterday, but other than that, just a real reminder, I think, out there of the beauty of the earth. We live in such a beautiful place, and I hope wherever you're joining us from, it's also beautiful. I have a few announcements to share as we get started here. First, I want to let you know that next Sunday, May 2nd, will look a little bit different. So we will not have a webinar link available to our congregation. We're sending everybody to YouTube. So go to the YouTube Fauntleroy Church webpage, and there you will find the link for the May 2nd service with an introduction from me. And then there will be a link that pops up in the screen that you can click on to go on to a wider worship in which we will all be participating. Our Conference of Churches, the Pacific Northwest Conference of the United Church of Christ, is having its annual meeting this week. And though the worship service is not directly related, well, it is related to the annual meeting, but it will be everyone can jump on board to the worship service. It won't, you won't feel left out if you haven't participated in the meeting. And they do that intentionally so that we can invite our congregations and invite the wider conference. You are a part of the conference. And so to invite everyone to that table and really gain a sense of who we are and that we aren't an island unto ourselves as an individual church, but part of something much, much bigger with God and with a bunch of other people. So we hope that you'll join us for that special May 2nd worship service. Reverend Mike Denton, our conference minister, will be preaching, and I look forward to that. And in that worship service, so you know, we will be having communion. So make sure that you have some communion elements ready to go so you're able to participate in that. After the worship service at 11:30, we will have our regularly scheduled coffee hour. However, the content of coffee hour will be a little different. So in coffee hour, rather than socializing as usual, we will have our budget informational meeting. That we try to do this once a year, about a month out from the annual meeting, so that if you're interested in knowing more about the budget of the church and how it's being formed and what's influencing it and what are our joys and what are our challenges, you're welcome to join us for that. So please look in your Thursday highlights email for the link to coffee hour and plan on joining the budget informational meeting. As a part of that meeting, Our finance representatives from our finance ministry and our facilities ministry, as well as others, will be present to also talk about the motion that will be on the table, the motion that will be brought forth at annual meeting to possibly sell the lower lot, the vacant lower lot of the parsonage. So know that that's also a part of that meeting, and we welcome you to come and hear more about that and discuss and share your thoughts. So other announcements, it is stewardship season. I know that a lot of you have mentioned receiving your packets in the mail, and want you to know that we're asking, the stewardship committee is asking and inviting you to actually pledge early this year. We'll be celebrating our Giving Sunday, our Pledge Sunday on May 16th. But the stewardship committee as we try to formulate this budget, it's really important. Pledges have a direct correlation to what we're able to do in the life of the church. So the stewardship committee is asking you to return your pledges by May 9th. Our theme is Together in Spirit, because we are together in spirit, whether we are gathered in person or afar. We are together in spirit, and our church is still doing so much. And if you haven't been around much or engaging much in the last year, I encourage you. We're going to be sending out actually a paper congregator, so you can learn a little bit more about some things going on in the life of the church that are very exciting. But that work is not restarting. It's been going this whole time that we've been worshiping online, and I hope that you have gained a sense of that, or will gain a sense of that soon. As we think about our stewardship in this world as a congregation, we have had different people speak to and put together some things for us. And we have now a video to show you from Bob Wiss and Diane Sprague, our chairs for our immigration task force, that they would like to show us about, or tell us about, an exciting partnership with UW medical students. So I'll turn it over to Ben to share that video.
This is a story about how these vacant offices were transformed by members of Fauntleroy Church.
And it's also a story about how, even in a time of social and physical isolation, our church found ways to have its mission money work in the greater community. I'm Diane Sprague.
And I'm Bob Wiss. We are the co-chairs of the Immigration Task Force. When we took over last fall, we faced a number of challenges. First, because of COVID, we couldn't even meet. Plus, all the immigrants were being turned away at the border, and even our plans to try and house an asylum-seeking family somewhere were just not going anywhere.
And then David Wells, who's also a church member, told us in January of an exciting opportunity. He'd learned of some UW Med students who had a dream of opening a clinic to assist folks seeking asylum. They had a place, a former St. Vincent de Paul thrift shop on Aurora Avenue in North Seattle. They had doctors, but they needed furniture.
So we decided to figure out whether this was just a dream or if it was real. And we learned a great deal about how doctors had really been volunteering in the community for more than 10 years, working with refugees, documenting what kind of violence they'd faced in the past, and actually producing a report which would go to the judge, who would determine whether they would stay in the country or not. The problem had been that they really didn't have any place physically to meet, so this was going to answer a great need.
Your immigration task force was excited to work on this project. We were convinced that it was going to be a reality. We began to search for furniture. Some was donated, some was bought. We came up with 4 tables, 21 chairs, 2 couches, 3 rugs, along with art for the walls, clocks, and even trash cans. On a Saturday in April, 6 of us packed a U-Haul truck and drove to North Seattle.
The next day, a group of UW medical students cleaned the offices and set up the furniture. This is what those empty rooms now look like.
The clinic is scheduled to open in May. Students say that they'll start small and build. We hope to work with them in the future, supplying toiletries and items for the clients. That way you can help too.
All of which goes to show, as this year's stewardship message points out, we are together in spirit.
Thank you, Diane and Bob. Isn't that lovely? This is one of the exciting creative things that we've been able to do this year. So thank you to everyone that's been involved in that effort and everyone that will be involved in that effort now that you know about it. So other announcements to share with you today. Just as usual, want to invite you to participate in the every week giving that is available to you online for our church. So you can find that giving button on our church website. And it's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you other worship leaders here with me today. Of course, we have Reverend Karyn Frazier, our associate pastor, Bronwyn Edwards, our music director, Gordy Mant, our liturgist, and Leanne Barris, who is the executive director of Earth Ministry and also one of our church members. So Leanne is here today as a part of our celebrating Earth Sunday. Our worship service today, we're going to be celebrating Earth Sunday. And she is here. Earth Ministry is an organization that our church has been intimately involved with in the past, and one that we continue to be involved with now. A wonderful organization doing great work in the Seattle area and the world. And we're so thankful for the work of Earth Ministry and other organizations that seek to make a difference with climate change and the environment. Before I turn things over to Gordy for the call to worship, and we'll engage a minute of silence before we jump right into that. I also wanted to say, related to Earth Ministry, that they have a trivia event coming up on, and gosh, if my notes, I forgot to write down the date, May 11th, right? Tuesday, May 11th? Okay, Tuesday, May 11th. They are having an online trivia event, and I want to invite you. I'm sponsoring a table, and so I have some open chairs. And if you would like to join in that fun event, you just email me today or tomorrow, and I will add you to my table. So please think about the ways in which that we can creatively support in organizations that are important to us, both our church and the others that are out there in the world. Let us engage in just a bit of silence here as we center our hearts and minds for the worship of God.
Listen to how everything sings. The streams and stones, leaves and branches, fish and fur-covered ones, birds leading the chorus. See how your desire to praise is echoed in every living thing. How in quiet moments the heart is moved to gratitude for all of creation, for the lavish abundance of it all. How nothing is earned, no achievements are needed. May you simply show up with breath, blood, and bones, and your loving attention to hymns erupting everywhere, until you can no longer tell where yours begin and nature's ends.
Hi, please join me for the call to worship. Praise God who calls all life into being.
The earth, sea, and sky are yours.
The sun, moon, birds, creeping creatures, sea monsters, snow, and stormy winds are yours.
We are yours.
Your spirit enlivens all the earth until it is like a cathedral, and she offers you your liturgy.
With her, our prayer is for the justice to be done.
For all creation to be freed from bondage and saved from destruction.
With her, our sermon is for the hungry to be fed.
For captives to be released, for the broken to be held and healed.
With her, our hymn is for your kingdom of peace to come to earth.
O God, who calls all life into being.
We are yours. Amen.
Amen.
Happy Earth Sunday, everyone. My name is Leanne Barris, as Pastor Leah said, and I'm the Executive Director of Earth Ministry. We're a multi-faith organization that engages people of all faiths in environmental justice and stewardship of creation. Earth Ministry's mission is to transform faith into action for the well-being of communities and the environment, the very earth and seas and sky and you we just heard in the call to worship. We work with individuals and congregations across Washington state and beyond, organizing people of faith to advocate for strong environmental policies and providing strategic guidance to religious communities. We do this work in three main ways, and I'm going to invite you to take three actions in response. First, Earth Ministry leads workshops and hosts events that helps people connect their faith values to care for the earth. We also make people aware of opportunities to live out those values in their daily lives. So one of the things you can do for the earth right now is to bring your electronic recycling to the church parking lot today to be disposed of properly. The recycle roundup goes until 3 p.m. and you can see the full list of what's accepted on Fauntleroy's website. For those of you on Zoom, Ben is sharing the link in the chat right now. Second, Earth Ministry supports houses of worship through our Greening Congregations program, which provides guidance for incorporating environmental stewardship in worship, education, building and grounds, and community outreach. And we're extremely grateful that Fauntleroy Church is a long-term Earth Ministry Greening congregation and supports our mission with an annual donation as a congregational member. In honor of Earth Day, I invite you to become an Earth Ministry supporter as well. You can make a contribution on our website at earthministry.org or at the direct donation link Ben is dropping into the chat. And last, our Faithful Advocacy Program provides resources, training, and opportunities for people of faith to speak up for systemic change. Current campaigns include advocating for climate justice in the state legislature and Congress, halting dirty and dangerous fossil fuel projects, protecting families from toxic chemicals, and supporting Native nations in efforts to protect their sacred sites and tribal treaty rights across the Northwest. The last way that I'm asking you to make a difference today is to join Earth Ministry in sending a message to your US senators, urging them to take bold action to recover our endangered salmon and orcas. A proposal is moving through Congress right now, and your voice is needed to make sure that our elected officials know that the faith community supports recovering these iconic species. You can find an action form on the Earth Ministry website on our Snake River Salmon page, or by clicking the link that Ben is sharing. Working together, we can make every day Earth Day and ensure a just and sustainable future for all God's children, both human and more than human. And if you need more than just my words to encourage you, I invite you to enjoy this beautiful video by Betsy Boyer called There Is Room. She created it last year as the pandemic pushed us inside and gave the earth more breathing room outside. And its message is still important. How can we make sure that there is always room in caring for the earth?
Earth inhales deeply, her edges expand. This sudden pause in our lives to demand creation breathes again as it was created. Clearing water shows our intertwining selves related. Lead into newfound silence. God is whispering. God elated. There is room. There is room. All of creation lies waiting in quiet measure. Wings soar above, less titanium, more feather. Reflect over water, wings breaking surface tension. Nature stepping closer, a moment of suspension. Lead into newfound silence. God is whispering. Pay attention. There is room. There is room. There is room. There is room. Hills, glens, vistas once more, a blue sea to the west. Wild-eyed, wild emerges from where it was repressed. From where it was repressed. There is room. There is room. There is room. There is room. This is our pause, granting space amid motion. Now we are called to a grand, bold, new notion. If Earth heals so quickly, can we fix what's broken? Move into the healing, live into the new devotion. There is room. 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 There is room.
Thank you, Betsy and Braun. That was gorgeous. Today's reading is Proverbs 8, verses 20 through 36, adopted from the Message. Listen to the Spirit of God's wisdom who says, "You can find me on Righteous Road. That's where I walk, at the intersection of Justice Avenue, handing out life to those who love me, filling their arms with life, armloads of life. God sovereignly made me the first, the basic, before God did anything else. I was brought into being a long time ago, well before the earth got its start. I arrived on the scene before oceans. Yes, even before springs and rivers and lakes. Before mountains were sculpted and hills took shape, I was there already newborn. Long before God stretched out earth's horizons and tended to the minute details of soil and weather and set the sky firmly in place, I was there. When God mapped and gave borders to the wild ocean, built the vast vault of heaven, and installed the fountains of the deep, when God drew a boundary for sea, posted a sign that said no trespassing, and then staked out earth's foundations, I was right there making sure everything fit. Day after day I was there with my joyful applause, and I was God's daily delight, rejoicing in the world of things and creatures, rejoicing in you, the human family. So my dear friends, listen carefully. Those who embrace my ways are most blessed. Mark a life of discipline and live wisely. Don't squander your precious life. Blessed are those who listen to me, awake and ready for each morning, alert and responsive as I start my day's work. When you find me, you find life, real life, to say nothing of God's good pleasure. But if you wrong me, you damage your very soul. When you reject me, you're flirting with death." Thus ends the reading.
Thank you, Gordy, for that beautiful reading. On this 51st celebration of Earth Day, what's struck me about these lively and lovely scriptures that there were, one of them was woven, Psalm 148, into the call to worship, and then the one that Gordy just read. What struck me was how our God put each piece of creation in place like this intricate puzzle. And that's something I've been thinking about this week. It's fitting together this world where there's this incredible picture of wholeness and everything fitting together. And yet there are just enough boundaries to make room for everything, to breathe and to thrive and to flourish. And by everything, I guess that means from the Big Dipper to bacteria. And I love that about some of these Psalms. I love the way these readings affirm God's love of a physical world. And I love the way it affirms God's love for mud and stuff and us, God's love for us. One of this year's Earth Sunday themes is a new heaven and a new earth. And it invites us into this intimate interdependence and this flourishing. It points us toward a whole healthy fit of all living things. And it asks us, invites us to search for wisdom in all of that, to search for wisdom who cares for all of this wholeness and who says to us, as Gordy just read, when you find me, you find real life, and to say nothing of God's good pleasure. But if you wrong me, you damage your very soul. And when you reject me, you're flirting with death. On this 51st celebration of Earth Day, I have been reading the Psalms and I have been looking at some of the history of the environmental justice movement. And that has been like standing beside wisdom in the morning. That has been like standing beside wisdom at this intersection between righteous and justice. And it has made me feel more alert to the fact that wisdom and God created this world of unity and hospitality and interconnectedness and this interconnected mutuality. And yet, we often foolishly prefer separation. And that's what I've been wondering about. We imagine ourselves superior to creatures and canyons and climates, and we worship our independence, and we build walls and fences between creatures and canyons and climates, and between countries and religions and races and neighbors. We even have this habit sometimes of keeping God safely up in God's old heaven until Sundays sometimes. I don't know why human beings do that. It's all this foolishness that makes gaps in God's wholeness. And then eventually, it's as though earth doesn't even resemble heaven at all. But even as I was thinking those things, I realized whenever I stand with wisdom, it gives me hope. Fortunately, not everyone is foolish. Not everyone pushes gaps into God's wholeness. Some of God's children are very wise and very awake and trying to repair those gaps, like those who work with Earth's ministry. And I think if you listen to some of the history of the environmental justice movement, I think you'll understand what I mean by some of those wise ones. It begins in the 1980s with news stories about protests that were erupting in North Carolina. And they were over a decision to dump more than 40,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil into a poor Black farming community in Warren County. And the protests centered around toxic waste contaminated with PCBs. And scientists discovered that if these chemicals from the paints and the plastics and the adhesives we use, if these were inhaled or absorbed into the skin, they cause birth defects and cancer and other disorder to human organs. And so in 1979, they were banned by the federal government. But a selfish, foolish, I don't know what else to call him, a selfish, foolish man named Robert Burns decided and hatched this plan that he was going to become America's PCB king. He was going to resell all of these banned chemicals to companies that still wanted them. And so he approached a friend of his that owned a transformer company and that had thousands of gallons of PCB-laden oil in a warehouse in Raleigh. And he made a deal. And after purchasing this dangerous waste, though, Robert Burns' gambit quickly unraveled. And so he came up with a second scheme. He decided that he would dump the chemicals instead. And he said he and others decided to spray the oil along the dirt, along rural North Carolina roads. And for 3 months, under cover of darkness, he and others poisoned this area that spanned 14 counties. And they poisoned it with 30 1,000 gallons of PCB oil. And eventually even state officials started to notice this 200-mile stain. And these men were eventually convicted of an environmental crime, though Burns only served 1 year in jail. And meanwhile, North Carolina had to clean up the mess. And so those in power of the state came up with a scheme of their own. They decided that they would plan to dump 10,000 truckloads of this contaminated soil into this soybean field in Warren County. There was no other county in the state that had a higher percentage of Black residents, and only a few could claim a higher level of poverty. But in Warren County, there was also a young mother whose name was Dolly Burwell. And Dolly had been raised by sharecropper parents who were awake and ready for Lady Wisdom every morning. And to Wisdom's delight, they hammered home into their young daughter the question, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? We know this. Dolly knew this. And Dolly said she also knew and learned for her parents that you can't just wish for justice. You had to fight for justice. You couldn't just believe that heaven and earth would one day seamlessly connect again like God's pieces of puzzle of heaven and earth. You had to fight for it. And Dolly's mother had also told her that she was the hands and eyes and feet of God on earth so that she could do just that. And that's what she did. Dolly assembled this small group of other wise women to save the children of Warren County by fighting the dump before it contaminated their groundwater and made them a magnet for other toxic waste. And Ms. Burwell said, we were poor and we were Black and we were politically impotent, but we were not silent. One of their protest cries was, we can't breathe. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? We can't breathe, this cry that has echoed through the cracks of injustice for 40 years until we still hear it today. Gathering in the Coley Springs Baptist Church, the women cooked for protesters and they created flyers, and then Dolly put out a call for civil rights leaders, and they came, including Reverend Leon White, who was a field director for the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice, and a UCC pastor, Ben Chavez, who was fighting for desegregation in North Carolina. And when he saw what was happening in Warren County, he shouted, "This is environmental racism," which was a phrase that stuck. It was the equivalent of something in the 1980s going viral, environmental racism. And for over 6 weeks, men and women lay in the paths of all of those massive, massive dump trucks. And sometimes even the children protested with their families. And about 500 people were arrested. Dolly and Leon White and Ben Chavez, and even Dolly's 8-year-old daughter was sent to juvenile detention. But the fight in Warren County was lost. because the poor town of Black residents was no match for white supremacy. And remember, Dolly Burwell and Ben Chavez and Leon White were walking with wisdom. They were walking with God's wisdom, God's delight, and that's no small thing. That battle there in Warren County was lost, but the fight for environmental justice, for that movement, was just beginning, because the national news had covered those protests, which was a first for Black protests, for environmental protests. For while the first environmental groups, which mostly had white leadership, concentrated mostly on wildlife and wilderness, the people who of color had been fighting toxic waste dumps in Alabama and polluting in oil fields in California. The groups, the justice groups of Black and Latino and Native American and the indigenous Alaskan people, mostly they were as poor as the counties that they were advocating for. But they were determined, and they knew they were the hands and feet of God on earth. And that was no small thing. And this justice movement started to grow because these other places and spaces noticed the wisdom in Warren County to link environment with civil rights. And everything about that movement took off. Under the leadership of Reverend Chavez, the UCC Commission for Racial Justice created the first environmental justice report, Toxic Waste and Race in the United States. And then in 1991, the National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit was convened in Washington, D.C., and they were hoping that at least 300 people would show up. But 1,000 flooded Washington. And they came from Prince Edward Sound because of the Exxon Valdez oil spill that had ruined the fisheries of the Native American people there. And they came from Albuquerque with concerns about open uranium pits. And they came from Chicago, from people who were fighting power plants whose pollution was dirtying the neighborhoods of people of color. They came from Houston, where there were garbage dumps being planned along fence lines of poor communities. And wisdom was calling others to the fight. Wisdom was calling all of us to the fight. Wisdom's spirit was on the loose. And all the while, the people of Warren County never did stop fighting. I heard this beautiful story that the state officials eventually agreed to clean up Warren County when that landfill they created started to flood. But the officials decided that they would drain the landfill and then they would dump the toxic wastewater into another poor community. But the people of Warren County, even though it had some benefit to them, rose up and said no. No. They knew that their neighbor's suffering was their suffering. They knew that their neighbor's breath was their breath. They knew that their neighbor's children were their children. And these wise ones knew that we are all a part of God's kingdom on earth. Puzzle, what happens to one happens to all of us. Unfortunately, some of God's children are wise and awake. When you find me, wisdom says, you find real life. To say nothing of God's good pleasure, but if you wrong me, you damage your very soul. And if only a few wise ones understood that 40 years ago in Warren County, if only a few knew that when this environmental justice movement got started, COVID has made that perfectly clear to all of us today. COVID-19 has given us this dramatic overview of this coast-to-coast stain of racism and economic inequity and health inequities. And it has shown us how fragile and interconnected we really are. Decades of fights for environmental justice have made things so much better. But in a recent study, it showed that 75% of African American communities are still the most likely to be right up fence line to fence line with a power plant or a factory. And that this creates more illness and diabetes and heart disease. And we know during this pandemic, we know the consequences of that have proved particularly deadly to them and to all of us. What affects one affects all of us. We now know that COVID doesn't just zero in on vulnerable communities. It just sets its roots there in the gaps. And then it takes advantage of all the other gaps and all the other selfishness and all the other foolishness of this human family. No matter where we are, no matter who we are. And suddenly earth doesn't look very much like heaven anymore. But there is hope. With wisdom, there is always hope. With God, our Creator, there is always hope. Dolly Burwell knew that. And I know that. On this 51st celebration of Earth Sunday, I am thinking about God and wisdom, spirit, and their never-ending delight in this world of mud and stuff and in us. And I have been thinking about wise people like Dolly Burwell and like Ben Chavis and like Leanne Barris. And her legacy of environmental justice that she wakes up to every morning. And I've even been thinking about all of those who got up this morning and who are driving into Fauntleroy Church's parking lot to carefully and safely recycle waste so it doesn't injure their neighbors. And I find hope in that. That gives me hope. So maybe this year's Earth wisdom is, if, as Dolly's mother said, we are the hands and feet of God on earth, maybe the wisdom is we must fight to close the gaps that we foolishly keep creating between creation and climate and canyons, between neighbors, between even ourselves and God. Close those gaps and come closer, like the people of Warren County did. Come closer to our neighbors who are suffering the most until we feel their suffering in us. And come closer to our God who delights and desires for all of earth to flourish and to breathe and to feel God's breath in us. And if we join wisdom's fight to do that, maybe, just maybe, this earth will begin to resemble heaven after all. May it be so. And speaking of heaven on earth, our next song is When Heaven Comes to Earth. And when Braun put it all together and sent it to me, all I could think of was, if God delights in stuff and anything, God probably delights in ukuleles. Braun pulled together the ukulele band to put this next one together right outside in God's creation with masks and social distancing to be good to their neighbors. Enjoy this piece, When Heaven Comes to Earth.
When heaven comes to earth, when heaven comes to earth, what a bright and glorious day. When heaven comes to earth, when heaven comes to earth, when heaven comes to earth. The sky so blue and clear, with birdsong in the air, the waters fresh and filled with healthy fish. No islands made of trash or clouds of greenhouse gas. When heaven comes to earth. When heaven comes to earth. When heaven comes to earth. What a bright and glorious day. The sky so blue and clear, with birdsong in the air. When heaven comes to earth. With skilled and gentle hands, all caring for the land. Respect and kindness for the animals. Good food for everyone, and all grown close to home. When heaven comes to earth. When heaven comes to earth. When heaven comes to earth. What a bright and glorious day. With skilled and gentle hands, all caring for the land. When heaven comes to earth. Each one will have a home where love and peace are known. Wise guidance for growing up in grace. No desperate lonely years or living life in fear. When heaven comes to earth. When heaven comes to earth. When heaven comes to earth. What a bright and glorious day. Each one will have a home where love and peace are known. When heaven comes to earth. Awake now and arise,
Thank you. That was a lot of fun. We come now to a time of prayer and an opportunity to lift your joys and concerns to God in the presence of a loving community. And we have a few to share. And if you have others, feel free to pop those into the chat if you're joining us on Zoom, or you can text Karyn or I with the numbers that have been put in Thursday highlights. Or you could attempt to email it and we'll see if it gets to us in time. We apologize if it doesn't. I also have on our internal facing Facebook page a link going, so we'll see what we can pick up by those different methods. First, I ask that you pray for the Ackers family. Ben lost his grandmom this past week, and so please just remember all of them, particularly his mom Jennifer, as they struggle with that loss and all the preparation that comes for celebrating the life of someone in this time of COVID. Also, I ask your prayers for Naomi's great grandmother died this past week. So her name was Lou, and so prayers for the feedback family and for Lou's son in particular, Michael, as they struggle with that loss. She lived a nice long life, though. And then my mom and dad have asked prayers for my Uncle David, my dad's next youngest brother in line. And my Uncle David had a stroke last night or 2 nights ago and is in the hospital, and they've discovered that he has COVID and he's not in good shape. So if you could please pray for David and for my Aunt Judy and their daughter, Karyn, that would be great. And then we received an online prayer from Nikki K. For the many people in her life whom she loves, especially her friend Greg, who lost his dad to COVID, and also for God's protecting presence for her and for her daughter. And then from Carol G, we have a prayer for the people of India and the devastating oxygen shortage that they're going through right now in the midst of a sharp increase of COVID cases. Prayers for her brother-in-laws, her brothers' in-laws who live in New Delhi, that they might be safe.
Prayer from Paul Levine for a person in his Bible study who's suffering from depression, but is seeking counseling and medication, but is still struggling greatly. So a prayer for Paul's friend. And from Phyllis, a prayer for Lauren, who is having a reaction to her treatments for cancer. So a prayer that they find a better solution for her for healing.
And for all that we know in our congregation and beyond, named and unnamed in the past, that are going through cancer treatment, let us remember them. And I am trying to keep my eye out on texts and on the Facebook feed and on the chat here. But as we wait just a little bit more, I'll share a prayer of joy, just a prayer of joy for our one of our sisters groups who is helping with the Fauntleroy Church Recycle Roundup today. And Leanne mentioned that. And I hope that you'll participate and go through your house and find some things that need to be taken or that could be taken to the Recycle Roundup. It is going until 3 p.m. So make sure that you get over there before then. And if you need help navigating what can and cannot go, please go to the church website and under news and events and find Recycle Roundup. And there's a great list there that'll help you out.
I don't see any more, Leah, that I can share with you. So,
okay, me either. So prayers for all the unnamed things, unnamed people that might be on our mind, and the other things, and certainly a prayer for our earth this day and every day. Let us wrap all these prayers in our love and in the power of God that flows around us and through us, and lift them up with just a moment of silence. God of wisdom, Holy Sophia, great creator. There's a children's song we probably have all sung, that attest that you've got the whole world in your hands. From a little tiny children to the aged, to the birds of the air, to the beasts of the ground, to the sea and the land and the air. There is nothing that is not yours. Nothing and no one about whom you do not care immensely. We sing this and we say it and we believe it, and yet we confess that we do not often notice that beyond an image and understanding of your hands holding all, we are weeping at the ways we do not do the same. You have made us co-creators beside you, God. And we confess that we collectively have not done enough to embrace that role of holding the whole world in our hands with you. We've put our love of things first. We've put our love of jet setting first. We've put our love of ease first. We've put our love of self first. Forgive us, God. Teach us. Give us the wherewithal to be taught and prompt us to more. In the midst of overwhelming problems, give us courage and tenacity to do something each day, to take even one small unselfish step each day to care for this world in which you have named us stewards. We are together in spirit in so many more ways than just a few. And this is one very important way that we must work together in spirit. Help us to do that, God. And give us the care and the compassion that you showed us in Christ Jesus, who taught us to pray. Our Creator, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Our closing hymn is For the Wholeness of the Earth. I think I have that title right. Please join us in singing.
We lift up prayer for the wholeness of the earth. We lift up prayer for the wholeness of the earth. We lift up prayer for the wholeness of the earth. Can you feel it rising in you?
We tune our ears to the wholeness of the earth. We tune our ears to the wholeness of the earth. We tune our ears to the wholeness of the earth. Can you feel it ringing in you?
We turn our lives to the wholeness of the earth. We turn our lives to the wholeness of the earth. We turn our lives to the wholeness of the earth. Can you feel it spinning in you?
God. For the wholeness of the earth, can you feel it rising in you? Everybody, can you feel it rising in you? One more time, can you feel it rising in you?
Can you feel it? Let me offer you a benediction, but also an invitation to join us in the coffee hour following this worship. You can find the link for that in the highlights. Let me offer you these words. May God, who breathes life into you and all living things, and who heals the whole world until it looks an awful lot like heaven or pretty close to heaven. May God, who sustains all creation and loves mud and stuff and you, give you peace. Amen. Our benediction response is as the moon, and our worship will end with this song.